I'm Peter Lavelle. Forward to Vladivostok on the eve of the meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Regional Group. To what degree is the global economy now centered in the East and South? Are we living in the Pacific century? And if we are, what does it really mean? To CrossTalk the APEC group, I'm joined by Ann Lee in New York. She's an adjunct professor at New York University and author of What the U.S. Can Learn from China. In Cambridge, we have William Overholt. He is a senior research fellow with the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at Harvard's Kennedy School. And here in the studio with me is Iwan Azis. He is a professor of economics at Cornell University. All right, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Ann Lee, Vladivostok in APEC, why should people know something about this? Why is it important?
It's important for a number of reasons. One, this is an organization that has been growing in clout, and it is a summit with a number of Asian countries represented. And many Americans are not aware of this, and with more and more activity going on in the Asia Pacific, and as you were posing a question, is it the Pacific century? And I would say yes, because the Asia Pacific region is growing in wealth, and whenever you have growing wealth, you have growing influence and power, and you're going to start to see more of these countries join the rule-making classes, and this is going to create changes throughout the world.
Okay. Bill, if I can go to you in Cambridge, are we going into the Pacific century, and are these the right countries to represent it?
Well, yes, we've been in the half century of Asian dynamism for the last half century, and clearly Japan, China, India, Indonesia have become much more important during this period, and they do join the ruling class, as it were. I think it's important to distinguish that from the idea that power is shifting completely across the Pacific. We actually don't know whether that's going to happen. When I was starting my career, Americans were paranoid about Japan taking over the world, and now Japan is one of the biggest problems in the world economy. China may continue its dynamism, or it may become another Japan. The U.S. may decline because it doesn't invest in infrastructure and education, or it may continue to be the center of innovation and economic dynamism. So it's the Pacific century. It's not at all clear what the weighting across the Pacific will be.
Okay, Ivan, what do you think the weighting will be? I mean, is it going to be, there's a lot of people that say this is China's club. Okay, let's be fair, it's China's club.
Well, one way to look at it is the following. If we just look at what happened in the last 4 years, we know that there was a global financial crisis since the Lehman collapse. And just imagine, suppose the Asian countries, especially the members of the APEC, Asian members of the APEC, is not doing like what they are doing now in terms of economic performance. I think the global economic growth is close to zero now. Now, the fact is, now the global economic growth
because of the APEC countries.
Exactly. Now the global economic growth is 3.5%. So it's, of course, it's not high, but it's not too bad. That's why some people
3.5 is a lot for a lot of countries right now.
Exactly.
Okay?
In fact, some people even question the terminology of global crisis, because many people now using the term global economic crisis. But how do you call global economic crisis when the economy in the world is growing by 3.5%? But the answer is precisely because of pull out by the Asian members of the APEC. So from that standpoint, I think I fully agree with Ann and Bill in terms of the the importance of APEC as the organization.
Yeah. And if I can go back to you, it's growing importance because the European Union is going down the drains. I mean, is that one of the reasons why it's growing in importance?
Well, Europe.
Let me go to Ann first. Let me go to Ann first on that one.
Necessarily go down the drain.
Go ahead, Ann.
Well, China actually has indicated their support of the European Union. Obviously, Merkel has been meeting with Chinese leadership over there, and they have announced new deals to invest in each other's countries. China has said that they will continue to buy Euro bonds, buying jet airplanes and whatnot. I think that they recognize that the world economy can't afford for the Eurozone to disintegrate. And so I think that China will play a role in trying to maintain a stable world order. Whether the growth rates will continue to stagnate or rebound down the road remains to be seen. But I think that what we're seeing is that the global economy is extremely integrated. It's really impossible to isolate them at this point. And in regards to the Asia Pacific, you may call it the China Club, but frankly, it's the Asia Club, because all these countries have companies that have such enormous investments in each other's countries that they're inseparable at this point economically.
You say it's an Asian club, but there are countries in the Western Hemisphere that are in it also. But you're saying they're not going to play much a role.
Absolutely. This is why I'm saying that the world is very integrated. And to try to isolate them and say, well, it's just the Asia-Pacific region or the European region or the Americas, it's really not quite fair, because China has joined the small group of nations that has interests throughout the world. And therefore, it is like the United States in that way, where it, cannot say that they could ignore other parts of the world.
Well, I mean, not ignoring it, but let me point out something to Bill. I mean, Russia is looking more to the east now because of the problems in the European Union.
I think the importance of this APEC meeting is that it's the debut of Russia's pivot to Asia, which unlike America's pivot to Asia, is real. Russia is making huge investments in port facilities where there won't be ice all winter. It's building roads and railroads and making a huge commitment. And the Vladivostok summit will show this off. Very little else will be accomplished at the summit, but this is very important and will have lasting consequences.
But what do you think about that? Because, Russia's turnover in APEC trade is about 1.5% of the total. That's small. That's minuscule.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, another way to look at it, and I want to follow up what Anne mentioned earlier. Yes, the world is getting more and more interdependent and interconnected. That can be positive, but it can also be negative. Now, the positive part of it is that, as we have observed in the last decade or so, the world economy is relatively healthy until the Lehman collapse in the fall 2008. So it's all because of the sort of open and market-based kind of an economy and so forth. Many countries are doing and going through the trade liberalization and so forth. That helps the world economy. But when you are more interconnected, when you are more interdependent, if one or two members...
Contagion.
I'm talking about contagion. And it is happening now. In fact, today, I'm sorry, I'm supposed not to say I'm here. We have a finance minister meeting on APEC that I'm attending here. And the tone is pretty clear that the world economy is not in a good shape at this moment. Now, the question here is that to what extent that will affect APEC members, especially the Asian members, because we all know that Asia doing relatively well compared to the rest of the world. That's why now the world is experiencing what is called the double track growth, in which the growth in the industrial countries has been slowing down, but the growth in Asian countries are relatively strong. So the question here is that will the contagion of what happened in Europe, for example, and also in the US to some extent, the slowing down of the US economic growth, affect the Asian members of the APEC? The answer is yes. And at least there are two channels of contagions. One is what they call the real sector channel through trade. And this happens especially in export-oriented Asian economies like China, Malaysia, Thailand, and so forth. You can see immediately their export drop because the prime markets for these economies are the G2, i.e. Euro and Eurozone areas, as well as in the US. So when your prime markets are in trouble, like what we are observing now, naturally your export is also affected, and then your economy is affected. The second channel is financial channel, and it is happening quite significantly now. If you look at the exchange rate in many of the Asian countries now, it's so volatile because of the deleveraging of many banking sectors in Europe and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is that as the world economy is getting more and more interdependent and interconnected, then many policymakers in all countries has to be more aware in terms of the contagion, the risk of the contagion. And from that standpoint, I think Russia is realizing that the connection with Asia is getting more and more important, especially in the coming years. And this is the reasons why they put a special and serious effort in terms of more integrated with the East Asian parts of the world.
So go with the winner, as you're saying.
Well, yeah, but also, as I said earlier, they have to be aware of the potential contagion.
All right, I'm going to jump in here, folks. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on APEC. Stay with our team. Okay, and I'd like to go back to you in New York. We've talked about interdependence here, and I think we all would agree with that. But there's a lot of conflicts within APEC itself, a lot of the countries. Can we look at China, we look at Japan, Korea, Philippines, etc. Okay, how are they going to work this out? Or can APEC help?
Well, this is definitely a tricky situation because these countries have historically lots of tensions from past wars, colonial behavior that has caused deep-set resentment, and these countries need to figure out how to put that aside and realize need to move forward the way that the European countries were able to put aside their differences and join and create the Eurozone. This is obviously a challenging matter, as many diplomats will understand, but with deeper economic ties, that's certainly one way to begin conversations. And then they need to understand that they would be much stronger and they would all benefit if they can hang together as opposed to hanging apart, which the European nations understand.
Okay, William, Bill, if I can go back to you in Cambridge, what about that? I mean, is this organization going to help alleviate those differences? Because they're very real differences and they're flaring up right now.
Well, I think the economic ties do help and the conversations do help. But the fundamental problem is governments that are weak domestically and therefore take nationalistic actions and are unwilling to step on local governments and citizen groups that exacerbate conflict. You've got a very weak government in Japan. They're always afraid of being the latest prime minister to go. They've had 6 in 5 years, and people are always looking for a way to reassert Japanese leadership and national identity, and the right wing has been successful in pushing some of these nationalistic actions. Governor Ishihara, for instance, wanting to privatize the senkakus, a new foreign minister from the Democratic Party of Japan breaking the agreement since 1978 that they would not arrest Chinese fishing boat captains. They would just chase them out. A weak leadership before the transition in South Korea. wanting to strengthen itself at home by having the president visit Takeshima Island that's disputed with Japan. And in China, a government which, when it was strong, when the leaders were strong, settled 12 out of 14 land border disputes to the satisfaction of its neighbors. But lately, facing a transition, wanting to get its factions' key people into place for next year, has given in to statements by local generals.
Well, Ivan, what do you think about that? Will finance, business trump politics, as Bill was talking about? I mean, or is there a ratio you see?
Yes, if we look at what happened in the past, yes, usually the economic cooperations help sort of mitigate whatever. But
but they're getting worse now, not better.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. We don't know what will be the end outcome. But in the meantime, I think politicians and as well as policymakers in the regions realize that the way to go is by strengthening the economic cooperations. But what is also important is that APEC is one example of the economic cooperations. At the end of the day, it's really the national policy. So I fully agree with Bill. At the end of the day, it's really individual countries,
but earlier you were, this is an opportunity as well.
Yeah.
Are they going to miss this opportunity for greater integration?
No, I don't think so. I think they realize today is very clear. All the finance ministers of the 21 countries confirmed that they need to increase and to strengthen the economic cooperations. Now, that doesn't mean that all the other types of conflicts will go away. No, but in the meantime, while they are trying to do all kinds of means, the economic cooperations will be strengthened because they believe that that will help.
Okay, and if I can go back to you, I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about here is the America's role in all of this, and it is in the organization. And there'll be a lot of countries that'll say, well, we want the Americans there because they can mediate these differences, okay? Because there's a lot of allies in this organization with the Americans. I mean, is that one of the reasons why they have a little bit more comfort? Because, you know, when you look at these conflicts, the United States has its Navy.
It depends. Some would argue that America's throwing gas on the fire and fueling more conflict because if you look at China's stance, they would say America's almost encouraging Japan's bad behavior in some of these island disputes because Japan feels that the U.S. will come to the rescue no matter what they do. And so it depends. I would say it depends on who you ask, whether America's involvement is beneficial or not. But I would say that it's clear that the U.S. wants to be involved. It's clear that it actually benefits the U.S. if there is tension because when they play countries against each other, it just acts as a destabilizing force so that no one area will be able to challenge the U.S. and therefore U.S. can remain the superpower when all these conflicts happen in other parts of the world. And U.S. is lucky in that it is completely buffeted by two large oceans and has very friendly relations with its two neighbors, Canada and Mexico. And so this way, if there is conflict in the Asia Pacific, this will enable U.S. to maintain its leadership position for a very long time if the Asian countries can't work out their differences.
Well, okay, Bill, if they can't work out their differences, then we will continue to see American hegemony in the Pacific. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I agree that it's worked. What's happened is that the countries on China's periphery have basically aligned themselves more with the U.S. because of these conflicts. And I also want to agree with Ann that let me put it as just the same thing, slightly different way. The American narrative that all these problems are caused by the rise of China and by Chinese assertiveness is worsening the conflict and not helping it. China is overreaching, but Japan is overreaching, and the Philippines and Vietnam are overreaching, and by not playing a referee's role, instead by saying one side is always right and the other side is always wrong, the U.S. is polarizing the region, and in the long run, that's not even helpful to U.S. interests. The U.S. will be better off if these conflicts are reduced, because the risks of increased polarization are just too great. A clash is possible anytime, and the whole virtuous circle of trade benefits and diplomatic convergence can reverse very quickly.
Ivan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, one example in the economic area, especially in the trade area, is the idea of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was really the U.S. ideas.
Yes,
actually.
yeah.
This is one way.
Well, some people say a Trojan horse too at the same time.
Yeah. See, the thing is, okay, let's think about this way. An ideal scenario would be TPP. It's not an exclusive kind of sort of cooperations, but more inclusive, meaning that the more members is the better. Now, as it is now, unfortunately, TPP is still seen as an exclusive, because there are some members, and one of that some members are really the second largest economy in the world, i.e. China. Is not really a member of it. And looking at the conditions and the substance that has been put in the TPP, it's unlikely, very unlikely, that a country like China will join the TPP.
Will it mean anything if China doesn't join?
Well,
if it doesn't join, then
it's just imagine a club, a trade club. Okay, the world supposed to be the World Trade Club, but the second largest economy in the world is not member of it. Of course, it can be there, but it's less meaningful. Put it that way.
Okay. And if I can go back to you in New York, where's your crystal ball here? 10 years from now, will everybody know what APEC is? Everyone knows what OPEC is. 10 years from now, what about APEC?
Well, I think it depends on the members and whether they choose to make it an important organization or not. Institutions are really driven by people, and it depends on if the leaders that make up APEC choose to create proactive, productive change with their organization and use it as a way to help resolve conflicts, as a way to increase cooperation, or they are just using it as a way to just represent their own national interests, then it probably won't really
well, I guess we'll end that on a very good note. It's all about leadership. Many thanks to my guests today in New York and in Cambridge and here in the studio. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.